My name is Elena Thorne. I am 34 years old, and for the last 7 years, I have lived in the shadow of a woman who believes that family is not a bond of love, but a curated museum of genetic perfection. Last Sunday, at a dinner table that cost more than my first car, my mother-in-law, Vivienne, slid a thick manila envelope across the marble surface. She didn't look at me. She looked at my husband, Leo, her eyes shining with a terrifying, righteous fire, and said, "I think it's time we stop pretending, Leo. You deserve the truth." Inside that envelope were the surreptitious DNA results of our 3-year-old daughter, Maya. Vivienne expected those pages to be a death warrant for my marriage. She expected them to reveal a lie that would cast me out of her pristine world forever. What she didn't expect, what she couldn't have possibly conceived in her coldest nightmares, was that those same results would dismantle the very foundation of her own life. But here is the part that none of them knew. Not Leo, not his envious sister, not even his stoic father. I had found out about the test 2 weeks before that dinner. And in those 14 days, I didn't just panic. I went to work. I tracked a ghost, I unburied a 36-year-old secret, and I prepared a counterstrike that would turn her polished dining room into a crime scene of her own making. Before I take you back to the day the first seed of doubt was planted, I want you to ask yourself, how well do you really know the people who claim to love you? Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? I read every single one of your stories. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to the moment I first stepped into the Thorne estate and felt the temperature drop 40 degrees. I was 27 when Leo first took me to meet Vivienne. I remember wearing a soft lilac dress, trying to look approachable, trying to look like the kind of woman who could belong in a house filled with original oil paintings and silent, heavy clocks. Vivienne didn't greet me with a hug. She stood in the foyer like a sentry, her posture so rigid it seemed structural. She took my hand, her grip dry and clinical, and her eyes didn't settle on my face. They scanned me. She was looking for flaws in the fabric, for a hitch in my accent, for the invisible marks of my middle-class upbringing. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological interrogation disguised as small talk. Vivienne didn't ask what I loved, she asked where I was from. When I told her my mother was a social worker and my father had passed away when I was young, she made a small, practiced gesture, twisting her silver earring between her thumb and forefinger. It was a movement I would see 1,000 times over the next 7 years. It was the sound of a mental file folder being clicked shut. Interesting, she had said. To Vivienne, interesting was the word you used for a stain on a rug that you intended to have removed. That night, as we drove away, Leo laughed and told me his mother was just particular. But I knew better. I had spent my career as a forensic accountant. I knew how to spot a person who was constantly auditing the world around them. Vivienne wasn't just being a mother-in-law, she was a woman who tracked origins. She was someone who kept a ledger of who belonged and who was merely a guest. For 5 years, I played the part of the perfect guest. I married Leo in a ceremony that Vivienne essentially directed, right down to the specific shade of ivory my bridesmaids wore. We moved into a home 40 minutes away, close enough for her to stage surprise inspections, but far enough for me to breathe. Vivienne's control was never loud. It was a slow, deliberate drip. She would arrive on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work and rearrange my pantry. I'd come home to find a note, spices organized by region. It's more logical this way. I would thank her, swallow my pride, and watch Leo shrug it off. To him, it was just mom being mom. He didn't see the architecture of the cage she was building around us. He didn't see the way his sister, Claire, orbited Vivienne like a moon with no light of its own, echoing every subtle jab Vivienne threw my way. At every holiday, at every birthday, the message was the same: Leo could have had anyone. He chose me, but I was still on probation. I was a variable in a house of constants. And then, Maya was born. She arrived on a Tuesday in the peak of summer, a tiny, screaming force of nature with a shock of dark hair. Vivienne held her in the hospital room, her face softening in a way I had never seen. She has the Thorne jaw, Vivienne whispered, a rare note of genuine warmth in her voice. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe the war was over. I thought a grandchild would be the bridge that finally allowed me to cross into the family. That hope lasted exactly 18 months. As Maya grew, the dark hair of her infancy began to fall away, replaced by something Vivienne couldn't categorize. By her second birthday, Maya didn't look like a Thorne. She didn't look like my side of the family, either. She was a beautiful anomaly, but her most striking feature was her eyes. Leo and I both have standard brown eyes. Vivienne's eyes are a cold, piercing gray. But Maya? Maya's eyes were a deep, haunting violet blue, the color of a storm at twilight. They were eyes that seemed to hold secrets she was too young to tell. To me, she was a miracle. To Vivienne, she was a statistical impossibility. The comment started as a whisper. "Where did those eyes come from, Elena?" Vivienne asked at Maya's second birthday party. She was holding Maya's chin, staring into her eyes with a look that wasn't affection, it was an investigation. I laughed it off, mentioning recessive genes and a great-aunt who supposedly had light eyes. But Vivienne didn't laugh. She touched her silver earring, twisted it once, and looked at Leo. "None of our people have ever had eyes like that. Not in 4 generations." She said it lightly, the way you mention a crack in a foundation. It wasn't an accusation yet, it was a noted fact. But in Vivienne's world, facts were never just facts. They were evidence. Over the next 6 months, the whisper turned into a campaign. It wasn't a frontal assault, Vivienne was too smart for that. She planted seeds in the minds of the extended family. She'd mention it at Sunday brunch, or leave old photo albums open on the coffee table, pointing out the uniform brown eyes of the Thorne lineage. I began to feel the shift. Aunt Sarah stopped inviting me to the gardening club. Uncle Peter started looking at Maya with a strange, detached curiosity, as if he were looking at a stranger's child. And Claire, ever the loyal lieutenant, amplified the signal. She posted a high-definition photo of Maya on Instagram with the caption, "Our little mystery. Who do you think she really looks like?" Followed by a series of detective emojis. It got hundreds of likes. It got even more whispers. I showed the post to Leo, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Leo, they're implying I cheated. They're saying Maya isn't yours." Leo just sighed, his eyes tired from long days at the firm. "Elena, you're being paranoid. Mom is just obsessed with genealogy. It's her hobby. Don't make it a thing." But it was a thing. It was a living, breathing thing that was suffocating my life. I started a log in my private desk, a documentation of dissent. Every comment, every interesting look, every social media post. June 14th. Vivienne asked if I ever kept in touch with my college friends from that summer in Italy. July 2nd, Claire mentioned how genetics can be so surprising sometimes. I was a forensic accountant. I knew that patterns didn't happen by accident. Vivienne was building a case. She was salting the road before the storm, waiting for me to lose my footing. And then came the afternoon in late August that changed the nature of the game. Leo was at a conference in the city, and I had a late meeting with a client. Vivienne had offered to take Maya for the afternoon. It was the first time I had let her babysit in months, but I was desperate. When I went to pick Maya up at 5 p.m., the house was eerily quiet. I found Vivienne in the kitchen, meticulously polishing a silver tray. Maya was in the playroom, distracted by a new set of blocks. "Where's her sippy cup, Vivienne?" I asked, looking at the empty diaper bag. The cup was Maya's favorite, a bright teal one she took everywhere. Vivienne didn't look up from her polishing. "Oh, that old thing? It was leaking, Elena. I threw it out. I'll buy her a better one, something more appropriate." A cold chill washed over me. The cup wasn't leaking. I had bought it 2 days ago. I walked toward the mudroom to grab Maya's shoes, and as I passed the small trash bin near Vivienne's desk, I saw it. Not the cup. but a small, clear Ziploc bag sitting on top of the mail. Inside the bag was a used cotton swab. Beside it, on the desk, was a manila envelope with the logo of a high-end genetic testing lab. Vivienne saw me stop. She moved with a speed that defied her age, sliding the envelope under a stack of magazines. "Just clearing the clutter, dear," she said, her voice like silk. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, the mask slipped. I didn't see a grandmother. I saw a hunter. I took Maya, I took the shoes, and I walked out of that house without saying another word. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the key in the ignition. She had done it. She had stolen my daughter's DNA. I sat in the driveway of our home, watching Maya sleep in the rearview mirror, her violet eyes closed, her breath steady and innocent. I knew that within 14 days, Vivienne would have her results. I knew that Leo wouldn't believe me if I told him his mother had gone this far. He would call it a misunderstanding. He would protect her, and the pattern would repeat until I was erased. I looked at the house, at the life I had built, and I felt something shift inside me. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Vivienne thought she was the only one who knew how to audit a life. She thought she was the only one who could track an origin. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had invited a forensic investigator into her home and treated her like a guest. I reached for my phone and dialed the only person who could help me move in the shadows. I had 2 weeks to find out what Vivienne was so afraid of, and I had a feeling that Maya's violet eyes weren't the only mystery in the Thorne family. I just didn't realize that the ghost I was about to find had been waiting 36 years for someone to finally look for him. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I sat in my car in a parking lot 3 blocks from a small, nondescript legal firm in the city, watching the rain streak the windshield. My chest felt like it was being constricted by a tightening wire. I had spent my entire career looking for discrepancies in spreadsheets, for the one decimal point that didn't belong, the one offshore account that whispered of a hidden life. But now, I was the one under the microscope. I was the discrepancy Vivienne was trying to fix. I checked my watch. 9:00 a.m. I had an appointment with Sarah Vance, a family attorney who specialized in high-conflict domestic privacy. When I sat down in her office, I didn't lead with my feelings. I led with the facts. I told her about the sippy cup, the Ziploc bag, the manila envelope from the lab, and the 7-year campaign of psychological erosion. Sarah didn't look shocked, she looked bored, which was exactly what I needed. She had seen this movie before. She leaned back, her glasses catching the light, and told me that in our state, what Vivienne had done was a massive legal overstep. A grandparent has zero legal standing to authorize genetic testing on a minor without parental consent. It was a violation of privacy, potentially actionable, and certainly enough to blow the family apart. "So, do you want to sue her?" Sarah asked, her pen poised over a yellow legal pad. I looked at the rain hitting the window. If I sued Vivienne now, she would play the victim. She would cry to Leo, tell him she was just worried about the family legacy, and he would fold. He would bridge the gap, and I would be the litigious wife who tried to destroy his mother. The pattern would stay intact. If I wanted this to stop, really stop, I couldn't just defend myself. I had to let her finish what she started. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want her to play her hand. But I need to know what's on the other side of that table before she flips the cards." Sarah gave me a look of pure, professional respect. She told me to stay quiet, to keep documenting, and to wait. She gave me one piece of advice that changed the trajectory of the next 10 days. "These labs have portals, Elena. If she used a consumer platform to supplement the clinical test, there's a relative finder feature. If you can get into that account, you won't just see Maya's markers. You'll see everyone Maya is related to." I spent the next 3 days moving through my life like a ghost. I cooked dinner, I kissed Leo, I tucked Maya into bed, and I felt the weight of the secret pressing against my ribs. Leo was distracted, buried in a merger at the firm, which was a blessing. He didn't notice the way I watched him, wondering if he would stand by me when the storm finally hit. Every time Vivienne's name appeared on his phone, my stomach did a slow, sickening flip. She was calling more often now. Her voice was lighter, almost triumphant. She was waiting for the mail. She was waiting for the truth to arrive so she could finally cast me out. She didn't realize that I was already inside her digital walls. It took me 2 nights to crack the portal. Vivienne wasn't a tech-savvy woman, she was a woman of habit. I knew her patterns. I knew her favorite charities, her wedding anniversary, the name of the prep school Leo had attended. But none of those worked. I sat in the dark of my home office at 2 a.m., the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my glasses, and thought about that silver earring she was always twisting. I thought about her obsession with origins. I tried Maya's birthday. Access denied. I tried Leo's birthday. Access denied. Then, I remembered the way she looked at Maya's violet eyes, not with love, but with a strange, haunted recognition. I typed in a date I had found in a box of old Thorne family records. The date Vivienne's own mother had passed away. Welcome, Vivienne. I was in. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I clicked on Managed Profiles and there it was, Maya Thorne. Pending results. But beneath Maya's name, there was a section titled DNA Relatives. The lab had already processed the raw data against their global database. I clicked it, expecting to see a list of distant cousins, of Thorne relatives I already knew. But the top match wasn't a Thorne. It wasn't a member of my family either. It was a 25% match. A first-degree relative. The name on the screen was Marcus_89. Relationship estimate, half-uncle. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. A half-uncle meant this man, Marcus, shared a biological parent with either Leo or me. I knew my family history, I was an only child of only children. This wasn't my side. This was Leo's. This Marcus was Leo's half-brother. Which meant Vivienne, the woman who preached about purity and legacy, had a secret son she had never mentioned in 36 years. The discovery felt like a physical blow. I sat there in the silence of the night, the clock on the wall ticking like a countdown. Vivienne wasn't trying to protect the Thorne legacy from me, she was trying to protect it from herself. She had been so terrified of Maya's violet eyes because they weren't a mutation. They were a link. They were a trait that lived in this Marcus, a man she had buried in her past. I looked at the location pinned to Marcus's profile, Portland, Oregon. 3,000 miles away. I clicked on his public profile. He had opted into the open to contact feature. His bio was short, typed with a heartbreaking simplicity, adopted at birth, Hartford, Connecticut, 1990. Looking for any biological connection. Just want to know where I come from. That was the year Vivienne had supposedly spent studying abroad in Switzerland before she met Leo's father. The family story was that she had come back refined, cultured, and ready to marry into the Thorne fortune. The reality was sitting on my screen in high definition. She hadn't been studying, she had been hiding. She had given up a child to preserve her social standing, and for 3 decades, she had convinced herself the secret was safe. But genetics don't respect secrets. Maya's eyes had brought the ghost back to the door, and Vivienne's own arrogance, her decision to steal Maya's DNA, had finally unlocked it. I didn't contact Marcus. Not yet. I was a forensic investigator, and I knew that the strongest evidence is the kind the subject doesn't know you have. I spent the next 48 hours building a shadow file. I tracked Marcus Callahan through public records. I found a high school history teacher with a wife and a 4-year-old daughter. I found a man who looked so much like Leo it made my breath catch. The same jaw. The same slight crook in the nose. And when I found a photo of him on his school's website, I saw them. The violet blue eyes. They were his. They were Maya's. And, as I would soon find out, they had once been someone else's, too. I backsaved everything. I emailed the screenshots to Sarah Vance and a secure private drive. I felt a strange, cold peace settling over me. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one holding the fuse. On Thursday, Vivienne called Leo. I could hear her voice through the phone, sharp and vibrating with a terrifying excitement. Sunday, Leo. I'm hosting a family dinner. Everyone must be there. I have something important to discuss. Something regarding Maya. Leo looked at me, a flicker of concern crossing his face. Mom sounds intense, Elle. You okay with going? I smiled at him, a real, genuine smile. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Leo. It's time we all got some clarity. The days leading up to Sunday were a blur of high-stakes performance. I played the part of the oblivious wife. I helped Maya pick out a dress. I even bought a bottle of Vivienne's favorite wine to bring to the house. I was watching the clock, watching the manila envelope I knew was sitting on Vivienne's hallway table, waiting to be the reveal. I thought about Marcus in Oregon. I thought about the life he had lived while Vivienne sat in her mansion, judging the rest of us for our imperfections. Saturday night, I did one final audit of the Thorne family history. I went into the attic and found a box of old photos Vivienne had tried to cull years ago, photos from her own youth that she said were damaged by water. I sat on the dusty floor with a flashlight, peeling apart the stuck-together pages. I found what I was looking for in a small, silver-bordered frame at the very bottom. It was a photo of Vivienne at 19. She was standing in a garden, her hair a natural, dark auburn, her smile unpracticed. But it wasn't the hair or the smile that stopped my heart. Vivienne's eyes in the photo weren't gray. They were violet blue. She had been wearing colored contacts for 40 years. She had literally changed the color of her soul to fit the Thorne narrative. The legacy wasn't just a lie, it was a total fabrication. And as I tucked that photo into my purse, I realized that Vivienne wasn't just planning to expose me at dinner. She was planning a public execution of my character. But she had forgotten the first rule of an audit: if you're going to look into someone else's books, you'd better make sure your own are clean. Because the ghost from 1990 wasn't just a match on a screen anymore, he was a phone call away, and I was just about to find out exactly how much he knew. The digital trail didn't just lead to a name, it led to a face. Once I had the name Marcus Callahan, the forensic investigator in me took over. I didn't need a lab, I needed a timeline. I spent that Friday night locked in my office, the blue light of the screen burning into my retinas as I cross-referenced the relative finder data with public birth registries in Hartford. It was all there, buried under 36 years of dust and deliberate silence. Marcus wasn't just a match, he was a mirror. On a social media profile for a local high school in Oregon, I found his staff photo. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was Leo's face. The same high cheekbones, the same slight, rugged asymmetry of the jaw. But the eyes, they were the violet blue of a deep-sea trench. Maya's eyes. I stared at that photo for an hour. I thought about Vivienne's obsession with purity, her constant harping on the Thorne standard. It was a classic case of overcompensation. She wasn't guarding a legacy, she was guarding a crime scene. She had spent decades scrubbing her own history, even going so far as to wear gray contacts every single day since 1992 to erase the one trait that linked her to the child she had abandoned. She had convinced herself that if she changed the physical evidence, the truth would cease to exist. But Maya had been born with the one thing Vivienne couldn't hide, the truth, written in her DNA. Vivienne didn't hate me because she thought I was unfaithful, she hated me because my daughter was a living, breathing reminder of the girl Vivienne used to be before she traded her soul for a Thorne wedding ring. By Saturday morning, I had a decision to make. My attorney, Sarah, had told me to let Vivienne play her hand, but my gut was screaming at me to reach out to the shadow on the screen. I did a search for Marcus's contact information. He was a history teacher. Someone who valued the past, someone who looked for the why behind the what. I wrote an email, then deleted it. I wrote another, then deleted that too. How do you tell a stranger that he's the weapon in a war he doesn't know exists? In the end, I didn't send anything. I realized that if I brought Marcus in now, I would be no better than Vivienne, using a human being as a strategic asset. No, the truth had to come from the source. It had to be pulled out of the dark by Vivienne's own hand. I spent the rest of the day backing up my shadow file to 3 different cloud drives and a physical USB stick that I tucked into the lining of my coat. I was ready. I was calm. I was the storm that Vivienne didn't see on the radar. That night, Leo came home later than usual. He looked haggard, the weight of the firm's merger etching deep lines around his mouth. He kissed the top of my head and sat at the kitchen island, watching Maya play with her blocks on the rug. "Mom called again," he said, his voice heavy with a strange hesitation. She sounded triumphant, "Elena. She said tomorrow's dinner isn't just a meal. She said it's a reckoning." "What is she talking about?" I sat down across from him, my hands folded perfectly on the granite. I wanted to tell him then. I wanted to scream that his mother had stolen our daughter's DNA to try and prove I was a liar, only to find out he had a brother he never knew. But I looked at his tired eyes and knew he wouldn't be able to process it. He would go into that house defensive, and Vivienne would chew him up. "I think she's just excited to see us, Leo," I said, the lie tasting like copper in my mouth. "Don't overthink it." He nodded, but the look of unease stayed on his face. He didn't know that by this time tomorrow, the woman he called Mom would be a stranger to him. Sunday morning arrived with a sky the color of slate. I dressed with the precision of a soldier preparing for a parade. I chose a dress in a soft, neutral cream, nothing aggressive, nothing that screamed guilty or defiant. I wanted to look like the perfect Thorne wife, the one Vivienne had spent 7 years trying to mold. I spent an extra 10 minutes on Maya's hair, brushing her dark curls until they shone, her violet eyes watching me in the vanity mirror. "Are we going to Grandma's?" she asked, her voice small and innocent. "Yes, baby," I whispered, kissing her forehead. "We're going to Grandma's for a very special dinner." I felt a pang of guilt then, knowing that I was about to use this child's inheritance as a wrecking ball, but I pushed it down. Vivienne had started this. She had brought the war to my daughter's cradle. I was just the one who was going to finish it. The drive to the Thorne estate was silent. Leo gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He knew something was wrong. He could feel the electricity in the air, the way the atmosphere seemed to thin as we turned into the long, gated driveway. Vivienne's house sat on the hill like a fortress, every window reflecting the gray sky. There were 3 other cars in the driveway. Claire's sleek convertible, Aunt Sarah's SUV, and Uncle Peter's sedan. Vivienne hadn't just invited us, she had invited a jury. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the maximum possible damage. As we stepped out of the car, I reached into my purse and felt the cold, hard edges of the USB stick and the silver-bordered photo of Vivienne at 19. I looked at the front door and took a deep, steadying breath. "Ready?" Leo asked, his voice tight. I smiled at him, a flash of genuine pity in my heart for the man he was about to become. "Ready," I said. The foyer smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax, the scent of a funeral. Vivienne met us at the door, wearing a dress of charcoal silk that matched her gray contacts perfectly. She didn't hug us. She didn't even look at Maya. She looked at me, and for the first time in 7 years, she didn't hide the contempt. It was there in the sharp line of her mouth, in the way she stood an inch taller than usual. "Elena," she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr. "So glad you could make it. I've been looking forward to this all week." I nodded politely, playing the part until the very last second. "Thank you for having us, Vivienne. I brought your favorite wine." She didn't even acknowledge the bottle. She turned and led us into the dining room, where the rest of the family was already seated. The table was set with the Thorne silver, the heavy white napkins folded like shrouds. Dinner was a performance of agonizing normality. Vivienne served a rack of lamb, the meat rare and red, as Claire made nervous small talk about her latest gallery opening. Uncle Peter and Aunt Sarah exchanged looks across the table, their eyes darting to Maya, then back to their plates. Everyone knew. The air was so thick with anticipation it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I watched Vivienne. She didn't eat. She sat at the head of the table, her hands resting flat on either side of her plate, her gray eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. She was waiting for the moment. She was savoring the silence before the scream. And then, as the dessert plates were being cleared, she reached for the manila envelope sitting on the sideboard behind her. The room went deathly quiet. Even Maya stopped fidgeting, sensing the sudden shift in the room's gravity. Vivienne didn't look at Leo. She looked at me, her face a mask of cold, triumphant malice. She slid the envelope across the marble table, the sound of the paper against the stone like a dry leaf on a grave. "Leo," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I did something. I did it because I love this family, and because I believe that a legacy built on a lie is no legacy at all." Leo stared at the envelope, his face pale, his breath hitching in his chest. "Mom, what is this?" Vivienne leaned back, her hands folding over her charcoal silk dress. "It's a DNA test, Leo. For Maya. And I think you'll find the results illuminating." I sat perfectly still, my hands in my lap, watching as Leo reached for the seal, unaware that the paper inside wasn't his wife's confession, it was his mother's obituary. The silence in the room was no longer just an absence of sound, it was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the lungs of everyone seated at that table. Leo's fingers trembled as they touched the edge of the manila envelope. He looked at me, a silent, desperate plea in his eyes, begging me to tell him this was a prank, a mistake, anything other than what it was. But I didn't say a word. I just nodded toward the paper. I wanted him to see the hand his mother had dealt. I wanted him to witness the exact moment Vivienne Thorne tried to incinerate our life together. Vivienne sat at the head of the table like a queen regent presiding over an execution. She didn't look like a grandmother. She looked like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "Open it, Leo," she whispered, her voice a low, vibrating hum of triumph. "Don't look at her. Look at the data. Science doesn't have a bias. It doesn't have an agenda. It only has the truth." Leo finally hooked his thumb under the seal and ripped it. The sound of the paper tearing was like a gunshot in the small, crowded room. He pulled out the stack of pages, heavy, white bond paper with the clinical letterhead of the lab I had seen in Vivienne's kitchen 2 weeks ago. He read the first page. Then the second. I watched his eyes darting back and forth, scanning for the blow he thought was coming. I saw Aunt Sarah lean in, her mouth slightly agape, and Claire gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned a ghostly white. They were all waiting for the 0% probability. They were all waiting for the proof that I was the interloper they had always suspected me to be. 10 seconds passed. 20. Vivienne's smile was still there, but it was starting to fracture at the edges. She was leaning forward, her gray contacts reflecting the chandelier light, waiting for the scream, the tears, the collapse. But Leo didn't scream. He didn't look at me with fury. He looked up at his mother, his face a mask of absolute, chilling confusion. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking like dry wood. "What the hell is this?" Vivienne adjusted her posture, her hand flying to her silver earring. "The truth, Leo. It says it right there, doesn't it? The markers, the eye color, the..." Leo slammed the pages down on the marble. "Probability of paternity, 99.99%, he shouted, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "Maya is mine, Mom. She's mine. You stole her DNA, you violated our privacy, you brought us here to humiliate my wife in front of our entire family, and for what? For a result that says exactly what I've known since the day she was born?" The room shifted. It was like a physical jolt, a tectonic plate sliding into a new, violent position. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Uncle Peter looked at his plate, the shame finally radiating off him in waves. But Vivienne. Vivienne didn't look ashamed. She looked terrified. The false peak of her plan had collapsed, and for a second, she looked like a woman who had realized she was standing on a trap door of her own making. "No," she stammered, her voice losing its silk and becoming a shrill, desperate rasp. "That's not the lab. There was a mutation, the violet eyes, Leo. Look at her eyes. They don't come from us. They don't come from her side. It's proof of something else. It's proof of a legacy you tried to bury, Vivienne." My voice was quiet, but in that silent room, it sounded like a thunderclap. Every head turned to me. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the interesting outsider. I was the one holding the deck. I reached into my purse and pulled out the first piece of evidence, the silver-bordered photo of Vivienne at 19. I slid it across the marble, right next to her clinical, stolen DNA report. "Leo, look at the photo. Look at your mother's eyes before she decided that gray was the only color a Thorne was allowed to see." Leo picked up the photo. He looked at the auburn hair, the unpracticed smile, and the deep, haunting violet-blue eyes of the girl Vivienne used to be. Then he looked at Vivienne, who was now shrinking back into her charcoal silk chair as if the fabric itself were turning into lead. The hard-hitting peak wasn't the DNA result. It was the look on Leo's face as he realized his entire upbringing had been a choreographed lie. He looked at the mother he had defended for a decade, the woman he had called particular and traditional, and he saw a stranger who had been wearing a mask since before he was born. "You have the same eyes, Mom," he whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Maya didn't get them from a stranger. She got them from you. And you've been wearing contacts for 30 years to hide it? You tried to destroy my marriage to hide your own face?" Vivienne didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stared at the photo, her hand frozen on her earring, the gray contacts now looking like cataracts over a soul that had finally been exposed. But I wasn't done. A forensic audit doesn't stop when you find the first missing dollar, it stops when you find the source of the rot. I stood up, the movement slow and deliberate, and reached for the USB stick I had tucked into the lining of my coat. I didn't look at Vivienne. I looked at the rest of them, the jury she had assembled to witness my downfall. "The DNA test you ordered, Vivienne, it was very thorough. You used a consumer platform to supplement the clinical report, didn't you? You wanted to be sure. You wanted to map every single marker." I turned to the sideboard where a digital photo frame was cycling through pictures of the family. I walked over, swapped the SD card for my USB, and hit play. The screen flickered. It wasn't a photo of the Thorne estate. It was a screenshot of the relative finder portal. It showed Maya's name at the top. And right beneath it, flagged as a 25% match, was the name Marcus_89. Relationship estimate, half-uncle. The room went silent again, but this time, it was the silence of a bomb fuse burning down to the last inch. Leo stood up, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Who is Marcus, Mom?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Vivienne's mouth opened, but only a dry, rattling sound came out. She looked at Aunt Sarah, who had suddenly turned the color of ash and was staring at the floor. "Marcus Callahan," I said, my voice echoing the clinical precision of the shadow file I had built. Born in Hartford, Connecticut, 1990. Adopted at birth. He's a history teacher in Oregon now, Leo. He has a wife and a daughter who is 4 years old. And he has spent the last 5 years of his life on that DNA platform, looking for the woman who left him in a hospital 36 years ago so she could marry a man with the right last name. I turned back to Vivienne. "He has your eyes, too, Vivienne. The ones you tried to die and hide and lie away. He's been looking for you. And because you were so arrogant, because you were so sure you could use Maya's blood to hurt me, you gave the system exactly what it needed to find you." The big reveal wasn't just the secret son. It was the absolute, poetic justice of her own weapon being the thing that unmasked her. Vivienne Thorne, the woman who had spent 7 years treating me like a guest in her life, was now the one who didn't belong. She had cultivated a pure bloodline by cutting a piece of herself out and throwing it away, and now that piece had come back to claim its place. Leo walked over to the screen, his hand touching the image of Marcus Callahan, the man who had his face, his jaw, his blood. He looked at Vivienne, and the love I had seen in his eyes for 30 years was gone, replaced by a cold, searing clarity. "You had a son," he said, the words falling like stones. "You had a child, and you never told me. You never told Dad. You let us live in a house made of glass while you threw rocks at everyone else." Vivienne finally broke. She didn't cry, she disintegrated. She reached for the silver tray, her fingers fumbling, her posture finally collapsing as the structural lie of her life gave way. "I was 21, Leo," she sobbed, the gray contacts now swimming in tears. "I was scared. The Thornes, they wouldn't have accepted. I did it for you. I did it for the family." But the family was already leaving. Uncle Peter was already at the door, his face twisted in a look of profound disgust. Aunt Sarah was following him, her head down, the loyal sister finally realizing she had been complicit in a 30-year fraud. Leo didn't move. He stood in front of the screen, looking at the brother he had never known, the man who was currently 3,000 miles away, unaware that his biological mother had just tried to use his existence as a weapon. Leo turned to me, and for the first time in 14 days, the wire around my chest snapped. He reached out and took my hand, his grip firm and protective. He wasn't the good son anymore. He was a husband. He was a father. And he was done being a puppet in a museum of genetic perfection. He looked at Vivienne, who was now just a woman in a charcoal dress, sitting at a table filled with rare meat and cold silver. "We're leaving, Mom," he said. "And don't bother calling. I think I've seen enough of your truth for a lifetime." As we walked out of that house, the heavy front door clicking shut behind us, the silence of the driveway felt like a sanctuary. I looked at Maya, who was already nodding off in her car seat, her violet eyes fluttering shut, oblivious to the fact that she had just liberated her father from a lifelong prison. We drove away from the Thorne estate, the gated driveway disappearing in the rearview mirror. But as we hit the main road, Leo's phone buzzed in the center console. It was an alert from the DNA portal I had cracked. Someone was trying to send a message. Someone had seen the match. My heart skipped a beat as I looked at the screen. It wasn't Vivienne. It was Marcus. And the message only had 4 words. "I think I'm home." The notification on the dashboard screen seemed to hum with the same electricity that had just leveled the Thorne estate. 4 words, "I think I'm home." They were the final notes of a symphony 36 years in the making. I looked at Leo. His hands were still tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the leather, but the tension in his jaw had changed. It wasn't the rigid, defensive posture of a man trying to survive his mother's judgment. It was the heavy, somber focus of a man realizing his world had just expanded and contracted all at once. Behind us, the mansion was a receding shadow in the mist, a tomb for 1,000 secrets that had finally run out of air. We drove in a silence that was no longer suffocating, but sacred. Maya was fast asleep, her breathing a rhythmic reminder of why I had spent the last 14 days moving through the shadows. I watched the streetlights pass over Leo's face, casting amber bands across his profile, the profile he shared with a man named Marcus 3,000 miles away. "He saw it," Leo whispered, his voice thick with a mixture of grief and wonder. "The second you hit play and those servers synced, he saw the link. He's been waiting his whole life for a match that didn't lead to a dead end." I reached over and placed my hand on his. He didn't let go. He held it with a desperation that told me the good son had finally died, and the man, my husband, was finally free to be whole. The collapse of the empire was total. In the days that followed, the fallout didn't just stay within the walls of that dining room. It moved through the Thorne family like a wildfire. Uncle Peter and Aunt Sarah stopped taking Vivienne's calls. The Thorne standard had been revealed as a cheap veneer, a costume Vivienne had donned to hide the girl with the violet eyes. But the most profound shift happened in our own kitchen. 3 days after the dinner, Leo sat at the table with his laptop. He wasn't working on the merger. He was looking at a photo of a high school history teacher in Oregon. He has a daughter, Elle, Leo said, his voice trembling. She's 4. Her name is Sophie. She's Maya's cousin. They've lived on the same planet for 3 years and never knew they shared the same blood because my mother was too afraid of a scandal. Leo reached out to Marcus that Tuesday. I stood in the doorway, a mug of coffee warm in my hands, watching him type the words he had never expected to say. My name is Leo Thorne. I am your brother. He hit send, and for the first time in 7 years, I saw the weight lift from his shoulders. The response came an hour later. It wasn't a demand or an accusation, it was a digital exhale. Marcus had been looking for Vivienne, but he found a brother instead. They scheduled a video call for that evening, and as the sun began to set over our quiet suburban street, the screen flickered to life. I stayed in the living room with Maya, listening to the two of them talk, 2 versions of the same blueprint, 36 years apart, finally tracing the lines of their shared history. I heard Leo cry. The deep, chest-heaving sob of a man who had spent his life believing he was an only child, only to realize the family he thought was perfect was actually just incomplete. Vivienne tried to bridge the gap, of course. She showed up at our side door a week later, no longer the queen in charcoal silk, but a woman who looked like she had aged a decade in 7 days. She had stopped wearing the gray contacts. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, the violet blue of them looking startlingly bright and alien against her pale skin. She didn't have an envelope this time. She didn't have a righteous lecture. She stood on the porch in a simple cardigan, her hands trembling as she reached for the handle. But the code had been changed. The locks were different. I opened the front door, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like the owner of my own life. I need to explain, she whispered, her voice a fragile rasp. The Thornes, they would have taken everything from me. I was 21 and alone. I thought if I gave him a good life with another family, I could start over. I did it to survive. I looked at her, and for a fleeting second, I saw the scared girl from 1990. I felt a flicker of pity, the kind you feel for a wounded animal that has spent its life biting anyone who tries to help it. But then I remembered the sippy cup. I remembered the Ziploc bag. I remembered the way she had looked at my daughter not as a grandchild, but as a biological threat to her comfort. You didn't do it to survive, Vivienne, I said, my voice level and calm. You did it to succeed. And you spent 30 years trying to make everyone else pay for the price of your ambition. She asked to see Maya. I looked back into the hallway where Maya was rolling a small wooden truck across the floor. The truck Papa Warren had made for her after he moved out of Vivienne's house to find his own clarity. You are welcome to have a relationship with her, Vivienne, I said. Because she loves you, and because I won't be the one to teach her how to hate. But you will never be alone with her again. And you will never, ever mention the word legacy in this house. Those are the terms. Vivienne didn't argue. She didn't twist her earring. She just nodded, a broken woman realizing that the museum she had built was empty, and the only people left in it were the ghosts of the lies she had told. 6 months later, we were in Portland. It was a crisp October afternoon, the air smelling of pine and wood smoke. We were standing in a small, vibrant backyard, watching Maya and Sophie chase each other through a pile of fallen leaves. 2 little girls with dark curls and the same hauntingly beautiful violet eyes, laughing in the sunlight. Leo and Marcus were sitting on the porch steps, drinking cider and talking with the easy, unforced rhythm of people who had known each other forever. They weren't Thornes or Callahans in that moment. They were just 2 brothers who had been found. I stood by the fence, watching them, and I thought about that manila envelope. I never threw it away. I kept it in a drawer in my desk, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. It reminds me that the truth doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need a curated audience or a marble table or a public execution. The truth is like a river, you can dam it, you can divert it, and you can try to bury it under 1,000 tons of concrete, but eventually, the water will find a way through. It will find the cracks. It will wear down the stone. And when it finally breaks through, it doesn't just destroy, it cleanses. Vivienne and Warren are in therapy now, trying to rewire a 34-year marriage that was built on a short circuit. Claire has moved to London, trying to find a trajectory of her own that doesn't involve her mother's shadow. And my mother-in-law? She's stopped dyeing her hair. It's coming in silver now, with traces of that natural auburn at the temples. She looks at Maya and Sophie with a mixture of pride and profound regret, a woman who finally realized that the most interesting thing about her family wasn't its purity, but its resilience. Here is what I know now, after the audits are closed and the ledgers are balanced. The people who try the hardest to expose your secrets are almost always the ones with the heaviest skeletons in their own closets. They project their fear onto you because it's easier than looking in the mirror. But you cannot hide from your own blood. You cannot dye your soul a different color. Eventually, the eyes you see in the mirror will be the ones that tell the world exactly who you are. As the sun began to dip below the Oregon horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Marcus turned to Leo and said something that made them both laugh, a loud, genuine sound that carried over the fence and into the neighbor's yard. I looked at my daughter, her face flushed with joy, her tiny hand gripping her cousin's. I realized that the weapon Vivienne had built to destroy me had, in fact, been the very thing that set us all free. It had shattered the glass house, but it had given us the earth beneath it. And as we walked toward the house for dinner, a real family dinner, filled with messy plates and honest voices, I knew that for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't just a guest. I was home. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story reminded you that the truth is always worth the wait, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Trust your gut, document the patterns, and remember, no matter how dark the secret, the light always finds a way. I'll see you in the next one.
Have a story like this? Send it to us, and we'll share it with the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true family drama. Thanks for watching.